Ryan's office revenge.
The best part about watching Jessica Martinez panic wasn't the money, though that $195,000 offer didn't hurt. It wasn't even seeing her scramble to explain to the board why 5 major clients walked out in 2 weeks. The best part was knowing she'd brought it all on herself when she hit that delete button during her live stream in front of 40 people. My name is Robert Henderson. Most folks call me Bobby. I'm 55 years old, and 3 months ago, I watched what I thought was my career get destroyed in about 30 seconds. Turns out it was actually the beginning of the most satisfying payback story you'll ever hear. But let me back up, because this whole thing started way before Jessica decided to torch my work in that conference room. And trust me, you need the whole story to understand just how perfectly everything fell apart for her. 15 months ago, I took a job at Midwest Manufacturing Solutions as a senior technical specialist. Look, I've been working with machinery for 33 years. Started in the Navy right out of high school, spent 8 years as a machinist on destroyers. After that, 25 years in manufacturing, working my way up from the shop floor through maintenance, quality control, plant operations, the whole deal. So when I saw this consulting job posting, I figured it would be good work helping industrial clients solve real problems, maybe share some hard-earned knowledge, actually use my brain instead of just my back for once. What they didn't mention in the job interview was that Midwest Manufacturing was bleeding clients faster than a cracked hydraulic line. The guy before me lasted exactly 7 months before walking out. No notice, no handoff, just gone. And my new supervisor, Jessica Martinez, made it crystal clear from day one that she blamed old-school technical people like me for the company's problems. Jessica was one of those Stanford MBA types who thought manufacturing was all about data analytics and digital optimization. Never turned a wrench in her life, but could talk your ear off about Industry 4.0 and predictive algorithms. She had one of those corner offices with whiteboards covered in flowcharts and buzzwords like digital transformation and lean methodology. The idea that industrial clients might want to work with someone who actually understood how a machine broke down was completely foreign to her theoretical approach to everything. When I started looking at our client files, I found exactly what I expected. Page after page of generic reports that looked like they'd been generated by software. No real understanding of how these companies actually ran their operations. No indication that anyone at Midwest had ever stepped foot in a manufacturing plant or talked to someone who got their hands dirty for a living. These weren't just any clients either. We're talking about Charles Morrison, who ran Morrison Steel Fabrication, a company that employed 180 people and had been in business for 28 years. William Foster's operation, Foster Logistics, moved freight for half the manufacturers in 3 states. Anthony Rodriguez ran Rodriguez Construction, building everything from warehouses to manufacturing facilities. These guys knew their businesses inside and out, and they could smell consultant nonsense from a mile away. So I started doing something that apparently was revolutionary at Midwest Manufacturing. I began treating these clients like the seasoned professionals they were. When Charlie mentioned during a routine check-in that equipment failures were killing his production numbers, I didn't just log it as a maintenance issue and move on. I asked if I could come take a look. Jessica nearly choked on her kombucha when I requested permission to visit a client site. "We don't do field visits, Bobby. That's inefficient resource allocation. Handle it with a video consultation," she said, not looking up from her tablet. But I pushed back. "Charlie's got $1.8 million worth of fabrication equipment. If we can solve his downtime problem, he'll probably extend his contract with us." 3 days later, I'm walking through Charlie's facility in steel-toed boots and a hard hat, talking to his maintenance crew, looking at breakdown logs, actually understanding what was going wrong. Here's what I found. Their preventive maintenance schedule was completely wrong for the type of heavy-duty equipment they were running. These weren't light assembly machines running single shifts. Charlie's operation ran 14-hour days, 6 days a week. They had press brakes that were 12 years old but built like battleships. Plasma cutting tables that ran nearly continuously, overhead cranes moving 3-ton steel plates all day long. The manufacturer's recommended maintenance schedule was designed for typical use, not the kind of industrial beating Charlie's equipment took. I spent 2 weeks developing a predictive maintenance system based on actual usage data, not textbook recommendations. Temperature monitoring on critical hydraulic components, vibration analysis on the big presses, oil sampling schedules that matched their production cycles rather than arbitrary calendar dates. We installed $6,500 worth of monitoring equipment and retrained their maintenance crew. Results: equipment downtime dropped 19% in the first quarter. That's real money, $38,000 in avoided production losses. Charlie was so impressed he signed a 2-year extension and referred 2 other fabrication companies to us. When I presented the results to Jessica, she pulled out her efficiency reports. "Bobby, you spent 28 billable hours on this project. Standard protocol is 10 hours maximum for operational assessments. Why did you spend nearly triple the allocated time?" She didn't care about the $38,000 savings. She didn't care about the 2-year contract extension. She didn't care about the 2 referrals. All she saw were efficiency metrics that didn't fit her digital-first protocols. "Look, Jessica," I said, "Charlie's paying us $95,000 a year now, instead of $45,000. Seems like a pretty good return on investment for those extra 18 hours. That's not how we measure performance here," she replied, making a note in her tablet. "Digital efficiency optimization is our primary success metric." Right there, I should have known how this was going to end. Same thing happened with Will Foster's logistics operation. Guy called me up about 3 weeks after the Charlie success. Said he'd heard good things and wanted to talk about his freight challenges. Will's problem was different, but just as real. Fuel costs were eating into his margins, delivery schedules were all over the place, and his drivers were working crazy overtime trying to meet deadlines. Standard Midwest consulting response would have been to recommend some off-the-shelf route planning software package, charge him $20,000 for implementation, and call it a day. That's exactly what Jessica suggested when I brought up Will's situation during our weekly team meeting. "Foster, logistics is a straightforward optimization case," she announced, clicking through her PowerPoint slides. "We have 3 approved software solutions that address route efficiency. Implementation time, 10 days. Billable hours, 12 maximum. But I'd already spent an hour on the phone with Will, and I knew his problem wasn't something you could solve with generic software, so I asked if I could dig deeper. "Bobby," Jessica said, "we need to maintain consistent service delivery protocols. Client problems have standardized solutions. That's how we scale efficiently." Here's the thing about working in operations for 33 years. You develop an instinct for when something doesn't add up. Will's fuel costs were up 35% year over year, but his delivery volume had only increased 8%. Those numbers don't make sense unless there's a fundamental process problem somewhere. So I did what Jessica definitely didn't want me to do. I spent a week riding with Will's drivers, mapping actual routes, timing loading, procedures, understanding where the real bottlenecks were. Let me tell you, sitting in a Freightliner for 10 hours gives you a completely different perspective on logistics than staring at spreadsheets in an air-conditioned office. What I found was interesting. The problem wasn't the routes at all. Will's drivers knew every shortcut, every traffic pattern, every loading dock from here to Kansas City. They were good at their jobs. The problem was back at Will's main distribution facility. Trucks would show up for their morning loads, but they'd sit in the yard for 40 minutes on average, waiting for warehouse staff to locate and stage the right freight. Not because the warehouse guys were slow, they were working hard, but the way incoming freight was stored made it nearly impossible to access outbound shipments without moving everything else first. Picture this: a truck comes in Monday morning with mixed freight, some going to St. Louis Tuesday, some to Chicago Wednesday, some to Milwaukee Friday. The warehouse crew stacks it all together wherever there's space. Tuesday morning, when the St. Louis truck needs to load, they've got to move Chicago and Milwaukee freight just to get to the St. Louis stuff. Then Wednesday, they move it all again for the Chicago load. It was like one of those sliding puzzles where you've got to move 8 pieces just to get one where it needs to go. I designed a staging system that reorganized how incoming freight was sorted based on outbound delivery priorities. Instead of storing everything together, we created dedicated staging areas for each delivery route. Incoming freight got sorted immediately based on where and when it was going out. Cost to implement: about $9,000 in warehouse layout changes, new racking systems, floor markings, a simple tracking system. I worked with Will's warehouse supervisor to retrain the crew on the new procedures, which took about a week. Results were immediate. Average loading time dropped from 40 minutes to 15 minutes. Drivers were hitting the road earlier, making deliveries faster, getting home at reasonable hours. Fuel costs went down $14,000 per month because trucks weren't sitting idle burning diesel while waiting to load. Will was so happy he gave me a bottle of bourbon and recommended us to 3 other logistics companies. More importantly, He doubled his contract with Midwest from $60,000 annually to $120,000. When I presented these results to Jessica, I thought maybe she'd finally understand what I was trying to accomplish. Instead, she focused on the fact that I'd spent 42 billable hours on what she'd allocated 12 hours for. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Bobby," she said, pulling up her dashboard on her laptop. "You're consistently overspending time on projects. Yes, the client is satisfied, but we're not optimizing our resource allocation. Jessica, we just turned a $60,000 client into a $120,000 client. That's a 100% revenue increase plus 3 referrals. Doesn't that matter?" "What matters is scalable processes," she replied. "If every specialist spent 42 hours on every project, we'd never be profitable. We need consistent, efficient service delivery." The third major success came with Tony Rodriguez's construction operation. Tony had been a Midwest client for 18 months, but he was getting frustrated with what he called consultant runaround. His project timelines were consistently running over schedule, which in construction means penalty clauses, loss bonuses, and seriously unhappy customers. Previous Midwest specialists had given Tony generic project management advice, better scheduling software, daily progress reports, milestone tracking systems. None of it addressed his real problem, which became obvious the minute I visited one of his job sites. Tony's crews were skilled and experienced. His project managers knew construction inside and out, but they were constantly waiting on materials, equipment, or subcontractors, not because of poor planning, but because of resource allocation conflicts between multiple simultaneous projects. Here's what was happening. Tony would have 3 projects running at once, say a warehouse, an office building, and a retail center. Each project manager would schedule concrete pours, crane time, or electrical subcontractors based on their individual project needs, but they weren't coordinating with each other. So Project A would book the crane for Tuesday, Project B would book it for Wednesday, but then Project A would hit a weather delay and need to push their pour to Wednesday, too. Now you've got 2 project managers fighting over the same crane, and one project falls behind schedule. I developed a centralized resource allocation system that treated all of Tony's active projects as a single integrated operation. Instead of each project manager competing for resources, they had shared visibility into what equipment, materials, and subcontractors were available when. The system wasn't rocket science, just common sense applied to construction logistics. Instead of 3 separate schedules competing against each other, we created one master schedule that optimized resources across all active projects. Implementation took about a month, working with Tony's project managers to integrate the new scheduling approach. Results were significant. Project completion times improved by an average of 15%, which in construction translates to serious money. Early completion bonuses, avoided penalty clauses, ability to take on more projects because crews weren't sitting around waiting for resources. Tony's annual contract went from $85,000 to $210,000. He referred 3 other construction companies to us, including 2 major commercial builders. But when I presented these results to Jessica, you can guess what happened. "Bobby, you spent 68 billable hours on this project. Our construction consulting protocol allocates 20 hours maximum. This is becoming a pattern of resource mismanagement. 68 hours to generate $125,000 in additional annual revenue plus 3 major referrals. In any reasonable business world, that's called a home run. But Jessica was living in digital efficiency land where hours mattered more than results. "Look," I said, "maybe we need to rethink how we measure success here. Our client retention rate is up 38% since I started taking this hands-on approach. Revenue per client has nearly doubled. Customer satisfaction scores are the highest they've been in company history. What we need," Jessica replied, "is consistent service delivery that can scale across our entire specialist team. Your methods are too time-intensive and too dependent on individual expertise. We need standardized solutions." That's when I realized this wasn't really about efficiency or scalability. This was about control. Jessica had built her management philosophy around the idea that business problems had standard solutions that could be applied consistently by anyone with basic training. The notion that some problems required deep expertise, extensive analysis, and customized solutions threatened everything she believed about how consulting should work. But here's what she didn't understand. Industrial clients don't have standard problems. A steel fabrication company, a freight operation, and a construction firm might all have efficiency issues, but the solutions are completely different because the underlying operations are completely different. You can't fix a hydraulic press with route optimization software. Over the next several months, our fundamental disagreement kept escalating. Jessica would assign me projects with strict hour limitations. I'd exceed those limitations because the actual problems were more complex than her standard protocols assumed. She'd document my inefficiency. I'd deliver exceptional results that generated significant additional revenue, rinse and repeat. The breaking point came during our quarterly review meeting in late November. Our CEO, Richard Campbell, was reviewing departmental performance when he mentioned that client retention had reached an all-time high and revenue per client had increased 52% year over year. "Whatever we're doing in technical services, we need to expand it across other divisions," Rich announced. Our hands-on approach to understanding client operations is clearly resonating with industrial companies who are tired of generic consulting advice. I watched Jessica's face during Rich's praise. You could see her internal conflict. The success metrics were undeniable, but they validated everything she'd been trying to stop me from doing. After the meeting, she cornered me near the elevator. "I want to see all your client documentation," she said. "Every analysis, every report, every hour you've spent on projects over the past 15 months. I'm conducting a comprehensive audit of our service delivery methods." It was clearly intended as punishment, hundreds of hours of bureaucratic busy work that would pull me away from actual client work. But I approached the audit project the same way I approached everything else, methodically and thoroughly. I spent 3 weeks compiling everything: client assessments, operational analyses, implementation reports, results documentation. The finished audit was 67 pages of proof that detailed technical analysis was directly responsible for over $280,000 in additional annual revenue and a client retention rate that had improved from 58% to 85%. Every hour I'd overspent on projects had generated measurable business value that our competitors couldn't replicate with their standardized approaches. Every inefficient site visit had resulted in solutions that fundamentally improved how our clients operated their businesses. I was actually proud of that audit. It represented 15 months of genuine problem solving that had transformed relationships with some of the most demanding industrial clients in our region, which made what happened next feel like a kick in the teeth. Jessica scheduled an all-hands department meeting for a Tuesday morning in early December. She announced that we needed to realign our service delivery protocols and that my audit would serve as a case study for discussion. I figured she was finally ready to acknowledge that detailed analysis was driving our improved performance, maybe even expand the approach to other specialists. Instead, she had me display my audit files on the main conference room screen while all 40 members of our department watched. Then she began systematically tearing apart every detailed analysis, every extended site visit, every customized solution as examples of resource misallocation and process inefficiency. "This is exactly what we need to eliminate," she declared, scrolling through months of careful documentation. "Excessive technical analysis creates unrealistic client expectations and unsustainable service delivery models. These files represent a fundamental misunderstanding of scalable consulting practices." I felt my face getting hot as my coworkers watched her turn my greatest professional accomplishments into a cautionary tale. She was presenting $280,000 in additional revenue and a 27-point improvement in client retention as evidence of what not to do. But then she did something that crossed every line of professional decency. She opened my complete audit database on her laptop, which was connected to the room's livestream system for remote employees. Every client analysis, every operational assessment, every process improvement that proved detailed technical work was the foundation of our business success. Her cursor moved toward the delete option. "Legacy thinking like this is innovation's biggest obstacle," she announced to the room and the livestream audience. "Starting today, we return to efficient, standardized consulting protocols that can be executed consistently across our entire team." And she clicked delete. I watched 15 months of work disappear from the screen. 67 pages of documented success gone in one vindictive click, broadcast live to the entire company. The conference room was dead silent except for the hum of the projector and someone's nervous coughing. You could feel the discomfort radiating off every person in that room. Even Jessica's biggest supporters looked uncomfortable with what they'd just witnessed. Jessica turned away from the screen with this satisfied smile, clearly expecting me to accept the humiliation and start rebuilding my work according to her efficient protocols. But she'd made one massive miscalculation. While she was destroying my documentation, she hadn't destroyed the actual relationships I'd built with our clients. Charlie still had his predictive maintenance system running. Will's staging operation was still saving him $14,000 a month. Tony's resource allocation system was still keeping his projects on schedule and under budget. Those operational improvements existed in their facilities and their bottom lines, not in our computer files. And apparently some of those relationships had been paying closer attention to our company dynamics than anyone realized. My phone started buzzing in my pocket before Jessica finished explaining her new streamlined service protocols. The caller ID showed Henderson Technical Consulting, a firm that 2 senior specialists had started after leaving another company last year. I stepped out of the conference room to take the call, my hands still shaking from watching 15 months of work get erased in front of my colleagues and broadcast to the entire company. "Bobby," said the voice on the other end. "This is Steve Henderson. We've been tracking what's happening at Midwest and we think it's time we talked." The conversation that followed changed everything. Henderson Technical had been monitoring our client retention improvements for months. They knew exactly who was responsible for the operational solutions keeping major industrial accounts satisfied. They'd been planning to approach me, but watching Jessica destroy my audit files convinced them the timing was perfect. "We're prepared to offer you $195,000 annually to join our team," Steve said, "plus profit sharing and complete autonomy over technical consulting strategies. We believe hands-on operational analysis is the future of industrial consulting, and we want you to build that future with us." $195,000, more than double my current salary, working for people who valued exactly what Jessica considered wasteful inefficiency. But the best part of their offer wasn't the money. "We know you can't bring proprietary information from Midwest," Steve continued, "but we also know that operational expertise comes from experience and problem-solving capability, not database files. If you join us and clients choose to work with someone who can actually solve their problems rather than someone who treats them like data points, that's just market forces at work." I understood immediately. They weren't asking me to steal clients or violate any agreements. They were pointing out that if I left Midwest and clients decided they preferred working with someone who understood their operations, that was their choice to make. When I walked back into the conference room, Jessica was still lecturing about standardized service delivery while my coworkers stared at their notebooks, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed. She noticed my return and paused her presentation. "Do you have questions about our new protocols, Bobby?" I looked around the room at people I'd worked alongside for 15 months, then at the blank screen where my audit had been displayed before being destroyed, then back at Jessica's expectant expression. "Actually," I said, "I have an announcement to make. I'm resigning from Midwest Manufacturing Solutions effective immediately. I'll be joining Henderson Technical Consulting as senior partner." The room went dead silent. Jessica's expression shifted from smug satisfaction to confusion, then something that looked like panic. "You can't just quit in the middle of a department meeting," she stammered. "There are protocols, transition procedures, notice requirements." "Actually," I replied, pulling out my phone to show the contract offer, "my employment agreement allows immediate resignation in cases of hostile work environment. Having my work publicly destroyed while being humiliated in front of colleagues and broadcast company-wide qualifies." Rich Campbell, who'd been quietly observing, stepped forward. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately before any hasty decisions." But I was done with private discussions. Jessica had chosen to humiliate me publicly so she could experience the consequences the same way. "There's nothing to discuss," I said, gathering my personal items. "My decision is final." As I headed for the door, Jessica called after me, her voice higher than usual. "You're making a huge mistake. Bobby, Henderson Technical is a startup with no track record. You're throwing away job security for some fantasy about technical analysis." I paused and turned back. "We'll see which approach proves more valuable." Within 48 hours, I'd cleaned out my office and started at Henderson Technical. Their facility was smaller than Midwest's, but filled with energy about building something innovative in industrial consulting. More importantly, I was finally working with people who understood that operational success came from solving real problems, not processing service requests efficiently. The validation of my decision came faster than I'd imagined. I didn't reach out to any Midwest clients. I simply updated my professional profiles and continued being the same person who'd spent 15 months developing genuine solutions for industrial companies. The first call came Thursday morning. Charlie Morrison called my new direct line. "Bobby, heard through the network you've moved firms, wanted to congratulate you and discuss Henderson's technical capabilities." We talked for an hour about his operational needs and expansion plans. The predictive maintenance system was still saving him money every month. By conversation's end, he'd scheduled a meeting to discuss transitioning his account. The second call came Friday afternoon. Will Foster wanted to explore working with someone who actually understood logistics operations instead of trying to sell software solutions. By my first week's end at Henderson Technical, I'd received calls from 5 former Midwest clients, not because I'd solicited them, but because they preferred working with someone who could solve their actual operational challenges. Meanwhile, Jessica was discovering what she'd actually deleted. Through professional network contacts, I heard about her growing panic as she tried maintaining relationships with clients who were no longer interested in efficient service that didn't address their real problems. When she called Charlie for his routine quarterly review, he politely informed her he was exploring other options. When she contacted Will about upcoming projects, he explained he'd found a partner who better understood his operational requirements. 2 weeks later, Henderson Technical had signed contracts worth $1.2 million annually, based largely on industrial clients who'd followed me from Midwest. I was promoted to senior partner with equity participation. Midwest Manufacturing Solutions laid off 35% of their staff and brought in a crisis management firm to stabilize operations. Jessica was demoted to analyst and transferred to a smaller subsidiary to focus on her core competencies. Today, I'm running technical consulting for one of the region's fastest-growing industrial firms. Every day, I solve real operational problems for companies who appreciate working with someone who understands their challenges. Sometimes the best revenge is just letting people experience the natural consequences of their own terrible decisions while you build something better elsewhere. The thing about building something real is that it lasts longer than any spreadsheet ever will. When you solve actual problems for people who know the difference between theory and practice, they remember. And when someone tries to erase that history, they're only erasing their own future. Jessica learned the hard way that in industrial consulting, reputation isn't built on efficiency metrics. It's built on results that show up in your client's bottom line month after month, long after the meetings are forgotten and the PowerPoints are deleted. In the end, there's no substitute for calloused hands and hard-earned wisdom, because when the machines break down at 2 a.m., they don't care about your MBA.